All right. I appreciate it, Richie. And welcome everybody. I was just chatting with Hal. He's standing over here to my left, and he'll be on in just a second, but we were reminiscing about our 20th year. We've been doing this 20 years now. So it started as a face-to-face program. Some of you have heard this story before. Started as a face-to-face program where we had nighttime programs. We would start at 6 in the evening, go till 9. And our first 4 speakers were Ron Harrison, who's still doing the webinars, Jeff Dunn, Hal Coleman, and Jay Barber. We didn't have Jay this year, but I'll work on him or get a replacement attorney. But this is our 20th. I would say you had white hair. Your hair was black then, Hal, but I don't think it was.
Yeah, I think it was. You could actually do this webinar. You know
That's
it
right.
by heart. You or Lisa, either one could do it.
So I'm going to go ahead and start these slides. I think we've got a. Do you need to stop share, Richie, or can I go?
It should let you go. Well, here, let me go ahead and stop. It might make it easier. Is it easier to see your share button?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you put that slide of Hal back up? We didn't get to.
Yeah,
like
for sure. Just a second.
Yeah, that was a good picture.
That is a great picture.
Look at that. I'm going to let Hal tell the story of this because this is not an old picture. This picture was taken how long ago, Hal?
3 weeks ago.
3 weeks ago. Okay. So I've known Hal. I'll let him talk a little bit about his background, but when I first came here in 2000, I met Hal. He was owner of North Fulton Exterminating and then sold. But he's been in the industry 52 years, and he is a Hall of Fame member of the Georgia Pest Control Association. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Hal, and then let him talk a little bit about these pictures, and then I'll get his slide deck up and going.
Okay, well, you said, how long do I have? An hour and a half? Because the pictures are going to take 45
That's
minutes.
quite all right. I want to hear the story again.
Yeah, it warmed up about 3 weeks ago for about 5 days. And I told my son, I said, we ought to go over to the lake where we fish sometimes. I said, because as warm as it is, the bass are probably going to be cruising around looking for places to bed. So we go over there, and sure enough, he goes way over to the other side of this lake, and I'm walking along the dam, and I see a couple of nice bass over in the corner, just kind of cruising around. So I had a little pumpkin seed 5-inch finesse worm with no weight, and a 6-pound line, and I just threw it over there, intending to throw it way beyond them and I hit that thing right in the head, that fish, and the fish disappeared, and the worm, I said, well, boy, I really blew that. And then I look, and my line starts moving. So I set the hook, and it didn't do any good. It just kept moving. I said, oh, man. So I had this bass. That was the one that's in my left hand. And it got it in, and I'm yelling for my son. I needed help. I didn't have a net or anything, and just had 6-pound line, and I was being careful. So I got the fish in, and I had a little stringer in my tackle box just in case of something like this. So I put it on the stringer, tied it to a little tree over there so I could show it to my son. I said, well, I've just blown this whole corner out. So I'm going to walk back to the other side and fish over there. So I go over there, and there's a little tree that kind of fall out on the water, and I threw the worm over there. It hits the water, takes off. I said, oh. So that was this fish. So back-to-back casts. And I was yelling, and my son finally came over there, and I said, didn't you hear me hollering? He said, yeah, but I thought you had another bad wind knot in your line. And anybody help you get it out? I said, no. So we're pretty good at guessing the weights, and we figured those were about 8 pounds.
Those are big bass.
And we released them back and had a good time.
That's good competition.
Playing with them.
Good competition bass right there.
Yeah, no kidding.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, Al, when you started in
Well,
the industry. And
I graduated from University of Georgia in 1974 with a degree in entomology, and I actually got involved in pest control while I was in school, studying entomology. And left there, and when I graduated, got a job with the Georgia Agriculture Department as a structural pest control regulatory inspector. I did that for 10 years. Then I left in 1984 and went to work for Arrow Exterminators. Worked for them for 6 years, 3 years in customer service, running routes and termite inspections. And then I moved into sales, 3 years in sales. And then in June of 1990, I went in business for myself as a one-man operator, and kept that business for 18 years, grew it into $1 million business, and sold it. That would have been almost 18 years ago.
Wow.
And I kept it for 18 years. And then to become a sales and marketing coach, I started studying psychology and neuroscience and buyer behavior, and read dozens and dozens of books, went to workshops, went to seminars all over the country, and mostly in the East, but learning direct response and psychological selling. And I had a mentor named Larry Latimer, who was kind of like Tony Robbins was before Tony Robbins became Tony Robbins. Larry traveled all over the country teaching people how to sell. And so Larry just took me under his wing and mentored me, and we began to put together programs for pest control companies. And we got this 2-day program all done, and Larry got sick and died.
Oh, crap.
So I just carried it on, sold my pest control business, and went into the coaching full time. And that's what I do now is I work with small pest control companies and show them how to build $1 million business.
You're good at it.
And so that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
All righty. Let me get your slides up, and we can get this party going.
Sounds good.
There you go.
Okay.
That's what everybody's seeing.
Okay, good.
You can see your next
Yeah.
slide, but everybody
Okay.
sees that. So
No, we're seeing that.
you seeing both of them, Richie?
We're seeing both of them too.
Yeah, that's not what's on here.
How's that? Is that it?
That's perfect. Now we're seeing just the slide he's on.
Okay. I
Okay.
think that does. Yeah. There you go.
Can I move this up in the corner a little bit?
There you go.
There we go. Okay. Can we turn this a little down a little bit so I don't look like a head sitting on the table?
Now we're seeing a lot more of you, Hal.
There we
Is
go.
that better?
I don't have a logo to show off, but I wanted to. Okay, are we on?
We're on.
We're
rolling.
Rolling. Action.
In action.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me here, Dan. I can't believe it's been 20 years that we've been doing
Is that
this.
insane?
They say when you're having fun, time flies, but I look forward to it every year, coming down and doing this. And tell that guy over there with no animal, tell him he can't bring that goat in here. Okay.
Take that alligator outside,
Yeah.
please.
So I do a series of marketing. It's called the Marketing Made Easy series, and this one is one involves customer service. And I always have a warning at the beginning of my presentations. The following is blunt, brutal, straightforward, and honest. It'll hurt some people's feelings, offend some people, and make some people mad. It always does, because I kind of tell it like it is, as you know. And I've had people come up to me later, tell me they felt like I was insulting them or something. I said, well, I appreciate the opportunity. But if you have, okay, because we're going to have some fun. And I want to start out by telling you a story that will be the premise for this whole exercise. My wife and I, she used to teach school. She's retired now. She's one of those teachers that didn't know when to quit at the end of the day. So she worked until nighttime almost every day. And she would come home, and so we didn't see each other much during the week. And I was going in one direction, her in the other direction. So either every Saturday morning or Sunday morning, one of those mornings was our date to go to breakfast together. And we'd go to the IHOP, which is about a mile up the street. Go in there, and people knew us in there. They knew us by name. We'd been going there for years, and I'd get 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, sausage, grits, coffee, same thing. And so a new little restaurant opened up in our town, and some of her school teachers were talking about. I said, have you been to that new restaurant up there? They serve breakfast and lunch. That's all they serve, but they got a good breakfast. And Lynn said, well, let's go with that try that new restaurant one day. I said, okay, we will one day, you know. So a couple of weeks later, I'm backing out the driveway and she said, let's go to that new restaurant. I said, okay. Now that's over the other side of the town from us. So it's 5 miles over there, you know. So, okay, well, we'll go over there if you want to. So we walk in and the lady says, how many? 2. Follow me. Follows, sits us down in the booth, gives us a menu. Y'all want coffee? Yeah, coffee. Brings us 2 cups of coffee. You want to order something to eat? Yes, we do. I want 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, grits, sausage. So Lynn orders hers, and the lady comes back in a few minutes, poured us some more coffee. Then she comes back, says, y'all want anything else? No. She gives us a ticket, and you had to pay at that time. Yeah, I think you get up and you go pay over at the checkout, kind of like you do at Waffle House. So after she left and when we're sitting there with our ticket, Lynn said, so what do you think? I said, major missed opportunity. And I got this look from Lynn like, oh no, I'm about to get another mini marketing seminar here. She said, what's wrong? And I said, just a major missed opportunity. And about that time, a server walked by. Now, they all had on black shirts, and on the back, it said, relax, it's just an egg. And Lynn said, she said, look, relax, it's just an egg. And I said, no, it's not an egg. It has nothing to do with the egg. It's about a relationship. I said, now, we just came all the way over here from our side. And the breakfast over there, we got the same breakfast that we get at IHOP, that we pay $16 for, and now we're paying $36 this morning for basically the same thing. And I said, if it's just the egg, I wouldn't be here. And I said, I'm not going to come back here. She said, why? She said, what could have been different? I said, well, you look out the window with the restaurant, there's a cemetery there. I said, well, I grew up, as you know, right up there at the traffic light where I grew up. 4 generations of my family grew up there at that traffic light back into the 1836.
Oh.
And I said, 4 generations of my family's buried in the cemetery here that you're looking at right there. And straight across the street from where, I said, straight across the street, right there, those townhouses, that's where you and I went to high school. And I said, when I was in high school, this was my dad's real estate office where we're sitting. And over there where that checkout counter is where his desk was. And I said, I'm about to leave here, and they don't know any of that. She said, well, how would they know? I said, because all they would have had to done was to start with, introduce herself and say, hi, my name's Tammy. I said, well, I'm Hal. This is Lynn. He said, you sound like y'all are from around here. I said, yeah, no kidding, we are. Yeah, I was born right up there by that traffic light. 4 generations of my family. So see, everybody wants to tell their story. We do. Everybody has a story, and we're dying to tell it to somebody. So I would have told her that and said, oh my gosh. I said, yeah, my dad's office used to be right over there. She said, that is incredible. And this is y'all's first time here? Yeah, first time here. Now the manager comes out in a little while and says, Hal, Lynn, Tammy tells me that this is y'all's first time here and that you were born and raised right here. Yeah, that's true. He said, look, I brought y'all one of our signature buckwheat pancakes here, and he hands me a plate with a pancake with 2 forks and says, y'all, just on us, this is our specialty. I want you to have one. Appreciate you coming in, and I hope you'll come back. I guarantee you I would have gone out of there with a smile on my face. Mm-hmm. And I said, this is a cool place. And especially when I'm walking out the door, one of them says, Hal, Lynn, thanks again for coming in. You know, y'all come back. I'd have gone out of there pumped up, and I would have said, man, this is great. So see, it's not about the egg, it's about the relationship. And if you don't build a relationship with your customers, they have no reason to come back, or they have no reason to keep you. In pest control, I just like to say, dead bugs will get you in the door every time, but it won't keep you there.
Mhm.
It won't keep you there. Because if all you're selling is dead bugs, if it's just about the egg and that's all, they're going to go back to IHOP sooner or later. They're going to find a cheaper egg and a better deal. And when they do, you're toast. So it's not just about the egg. You got to deliver. Dan, and you'll remember when we used to do this live, I would ask people in the audience, I would say, raise your hand if you provide good customer service, and everybody would raise their hand. And I said, if you provide good customer service, I could take your customers away from you in a heartbeat, because I believe in providing absolute, over the top, unbelievable, hands down, shock and awe customer service. Doing things for your customer that they would never imagine. I used to tell my employees, I said, when you're backing out the driveway, I want them calling their neighbors saying, you won't believe what my pest control person did for me today. And they're shouting now. I call it the shock and awe effect, and we'll explain more how that works. But I nicknamed it SACS. That stands for shock and awe customer service. And the opposite of SACS is SUCS. That stands for shamefully undelivered customer service. Okay, so if you're not providing SACS, your customer service sucks, so to speak. But it's all about the law of reciprocity. And that simply means, in the context of what we're talking about here, customer service, is that if you do something nicely, their immediate innate reaction is to return the favor.
It is so true.
Return the favor. When you do something nice for somebody, it creates two things. It creates appreciation and creates obligation. Now, to show you how this works in simple terms is if you were going to a restaurant to eat and you're walking up to you park your car, you're walking to the door of the restaurant, and there's a stranger 5-10 steps behind you. Most people, unless you're my brother-in-law, you're going to pull the door open and you're going to motion for the stranger to go through. That's the thing to do. But a lot of restaurants, most of them have double doors. When they get to the second door, they're almost always going to open the door and let you go through to reciprocate. If you ever gotten a Christmas present from somebody that you didn't expect, you immediately go into a panic mode. Your adrenaline rises. Oh gosh, I got to get them something in the mail. I got to reciprocate. So it creates appreciation and obligation. Now, we're going to talk about this right now from a marketing standpoint. Okay, the most powerful marketing tool that a business has is their customer service. And if you give them more than what they expected, give them more than what they perceived that they paid for, by doing a lot of other little things for them that we're going to talk about later, we'll get a whole list of them. But now they feel appreciation and obligation, and they want to pay you back. They're uncomfortable until they pay you back. How can they pay you back? This is important. You train them how to pay you back. When they say, I appreciate this so much, how can I thank you? You say, well, send me a new customer. Their first reaction is, well, I wish I could, but I don't know how. So you train them right there on the spot. You say, bottom line, if you have a neighbor or a friend or a family member or work associate, and you hear them bring up the subject of bugs at any time, mosquitoes, ants, anytime the subject of bugs or anything comes up, tell them, oh, I know somebody you need to call. And they say, okay, I'll do that. And they'll remember you telling them that. And a good example of that is I have a friend named Steve who is in the mortgage business. And back in 2008, when the economy tanked and mortgage companies just folded up and real estate came to a standstill, and his business was in the tank, and he'd done real well. And he said he used to take his family to Florida for 2 weeks. He'd take his wife and his 2 kids and his mother-in-law. And they took 2 cars, So he said he's driving one car and with his mother-in-law, he called her mom, and then his wife and his two kids are in the car behind him. So he said they're going down the road, and he said I decided to play with my mother-in-law a little bit. And he said, Mom, I need to tell you, we're not going to be able to stay down here 2 weeks like we always have. She said, what do you mean? He said, well, we're only going to be able to stay about 3 days. And she's like, why? He said, well, in case you haven't noticed, the mortgage business is in the tank. I'm not doing any business. And she said, well, you need some money? And he said, no, I don't need any money. But he said, it sure would be nice if you'd send me a customer. And she said, well, Steve, honey, how could I send you a customer? I don't know anything about the mortgage business. He said, well, you get your hair done about once every 3 weeks. You play bridge every week. You're a member of the Historical Society. He said, you know everybody in town. And he said, I've been in business for 12 years and you've never sent me a customer. She's like, well, honey, I don't know. He said, if you're around any of these people and you hear anybody say that they're buying a house or they're selling a house and moving or they're refinancing a house, just tell them to call me. That's all you have to do. It's just, and he said, so we get back home from Florida, and he said, 2 days after we got home, my mother-in-law calls me and says, Steve, I'm going to get my hair done, and Barbara wants to talk to you. She's refinancing her house. I think I'm going to put her on the phone. And he said, so I sold the lady along. Took my mother-in-law 2 days to get me a customer after I trained her. In 12 years, she had never got him a customer. So you set it up by doing the extra stuff for your customers, and you just put a smile on their face, and they appreciate and they feel obligated to help you. How can you help me? Send me a new customer. Anybody in your family, your neighbors, friends, associates, family members, hear anybody talking about bugs or moving or need termite problems or anything, just tell them to call me, and you'd be surprised. And now they feel good they've been able to repay you. So we're going to talk about 9 surefire ways to make your customers fall in love with you. Why would you want your customers to love you? Now, they're not going to love you as much as maybe their biological family, but I love some of my friends and neighbors. I really do. I love them. They're part of my life. And why would that be important that your customers love you is because what do we do with people that we love? We talk about them. I talk about my kids, I always talk about my grandkids, talk about my wife, the people that I love, I talk about them. It's the same way in your circle of friends. You talk about each other, people that you really care about. So that's why it's important for your customers not just to like you, but to love you like a member of the family. And there are ways to do that. And we're going to talk about some of them. To start with, number one, you just need to be easy to do business with. And believe me, some businesses are not easy to do business with. You need to be easy to find. You need to be easy to pay. You need to be easy to deal with. You need to be easy to talk to. And you need to be easy to please. I don't have a very big lawn, but I always mowed it myself, and I had a little lawnmower that I wore it out. And then one summer I had to go buy a new one. It lasted one summer. Then I went and bought another one the next summer, and it pooped. They don't make them the way they used to. So I decided one day my neighbor had a lawn care service. I could see him over there mowing his lawn and blowing leaves around. So one day I went out to the mailbox, and there they are at my neighbor's yard. So I called this, waved to the guy over there, and I stopped his mower, and I went over and talked to him. I said, I live next door, and I said, I've been thinking about getting a lawn guy. I said, you got time to give me an estimate? And he said, sure. So he walked over there. Excuse me, I'm getting over some sinus issues, and I got a little tickle in my throat. I walked over there with him, and he looked at my lawn. He said, $35 every 2 weeks. He said, I not only mow your lawn, we'll blow off your driveway, your walkway. He said, we'll pull up weeds, we'll trim some little odds and ends. But he said, we'll make everything look great. And $35 every 2 weeks. I said, wow, that's a good deal. I said, well, how do you want to be paid? He said, how do you want to pay me? He said, how do you want to pay me? I said, well, probably my wife pays the bills, but I would imagine she would pay you with a check. He said, that'll be fine. I said, you can pay me cash, you can pay me a check, you can give me a credit card. He said, I live 4 streets over. He said, you can come by and put it in my mailbox. He said, I'll leave a bill in your mailbox and you pay. Yeah. He said, whatever works for you. I said, man, you're an incredibly easy guy to do business with. He said, hey, whatever it takes, we're here to please. So he was great to do business with. Now, there are some people who are not. And let's take pest control, for instance. Somebody wants to pay you with a check. Okay. No, we only take credit cards. You have to give us a credit card number and we keep it a file and we ding it, Now, especially you've got some older people that don't want to do it that way. I'm sorry, that's just the way we do business. Now, here, this day and age, we're doing this in 2025. The average lifespan of a pest control customer at this day and age is probably about 10 years on average. They stay with you and they can probably spend around $6,000 with you.
Wow.
So you're just going to blow off a $6,000 customer because they want to pay you a different way. So be easy to do business with. And I ran in this first one here, easy to find. I ran into a guy at a conference one time and we were just talking about, I think we were sitting eating lunch, and he introduced himself. And I said, where are you located? He said, Roswell, Georgia. I said, Roswell, Georgia? He said, yeah. I said, how long have you been in Roswell, Georgia? He said, 9 years. I said, I live in Roswell, Georgia. I said, I'm a native. I know everybody in Roswell, Georgia. And I thought I knew everybody in the pest control business. I said, at that time, I said, I'm president of the Georgia Pest Control Association. And I said, how come I've never seen you and I've never heard of you? He said, well, I don't know. So not long after that, I happened to see one of his trucks, and it had a little sign on it about the size of this computer screen that I'm looking at right now. And it was like a dark brown sign with light brown letters on it. There was no contrast. There was nothing. And I noticed it and I said, that's that guy's pest control business. Wow. And I said to myself, I've probably seen his trucks 1,000 times and didn't know it was him. Never, because it's so hard to read and so nondescript. And I said, that's that guy's pest control business. He's been right under my nose all these years and never even knew it was a pest control business. So easy to find, And nowadays with, before the internet, you had signs and ads and billboards and things, but got to be easy to find, easy to deal with, easy to talk to, easy to please. If you'll be that way, your customers will love you.
I pay people with Venmo now.
Yeah, Venmo, PayPal.
Yeah.
All kind of ways to pay now. And a lot of my customers pay me with PayPal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about the customers. There's a president, he may be retired now, but a guy named Nido Qubein, who's president of High Point University in North Carolina. He's one of the world's greatest marketers. He speaks all over the world on selling and marketing. He's a fantastic speaker, just mesmerizing. He and his wife actually ballroom dancers also. So when he's on the stage, you can't take your eyes off of him. And I heard him at a big international conference up at the Opryland Hotel one time. But he told the story about one day he was sitting in his office looking out the window at High Point University of his office at the quad out there. And there were walkways that came from all 4 directions to the center. And there's like a little garden in there with some trees and flowers and all. And then the walkways went all the way around it. But he said there was a path going through the flowers to the other side where people were cutting through the little flower garden. instead of walking all the way around. So he called his maintenance man. He said, come up to my office when you get a chance. So the maintenance man came in, and Nido, I think he's from Syria. He has a little bit of an accent, but he said, look at you see the quad. He said, you see the pathway where they walking through the flowers. He said, yes. He said, I don't know why they do that. He said, we're going to put a sign up or something. They got a walkway. I don't know why. He said, well, what I want you to do is I want you to go get some concrete, and I want you to pave the path that they have worn through the flower. He said, but that's right through the flower bed. He said, I don't care. He said, they are showing you where they want to walk.
Mhm.
They don't want to walk around. They want to walk through. So make it easy for them to walk where they want to walk.
Mhm.
And so you got to make it easy for people, especially your customers. Give them what they want. Be easy to do business with. Give them what they want, not what you want them to have. Okay?
What I want's the phone number. Make sure your phone number is easy to find.
Yes, make sure your phone numbers.
somebody
You'd be
answers the
surprised
phone.
how many websites I look at and can't find a phone number on there.
And somebody answers the phone.
Oh gosh, yeah, they answer the phone. I had my people in my business start answering the phone this way. I was like, answer the phone. It's a great day at North Fulton Exterminating. This is, how can I help you today? And people would flip out on the other end of the phone. They said, wow, you sound like having a good time over there. I said, we're always having a good time at North Fulton Exterminating. And so I actually went around, I had 10 employees, and one day I said, this is the way we're going to start answering the phone. And we went around the table. We'd have a meeting every Monday morning. And I had my office manager was a guy named Lloyd, and he was older. He was probably in his 50s at the time. I was in my 40s. And so I gave him the script blank. I said, it's a great day at North Fulton Exterminating. This is Bob. How can I help you? And I had all my employees. I said, you just won the lottery. So it gets Lloyd. Lloyd had one of those voices where it was just monotone. He never get higher or low when he was talking. He just sounded like this all the time. It's just amazing that there was no inflections, no nothing when he talked. So Lloyd gets it, and he said, it's a great day at North Fulton Exterminating. He said, Lloyd, how can I help you? I said, no, Lloyd, you got to say this like you mean it. I said, say it with some energy. Try that again. He said, it's a great day at North Fulton Exterminating. It's Lloyd, how can I help you? And I said, no, Lloyd, say it like you're saying it to somebody across the street. Say it like you just want. I want you to shout it out with a big smile on your face. And he goes, it's a great day at North Fulton Exterminating. It's Lloyd, I can help you. I said, Lloyd, don't answer the phone. If the phone rings, don't answer it. I said, all y'all, Lloyd, it's not going to answer the phone anymore. Okay, don't answer it. So I taught this to a client out in St. Louis I had, who had a lawn care business. I think he had like 43 employees. They were adding pest control. So he hired me to help him. And he had 2 girls in the office, young girls. And I don't remember. I think one of them's name was Brandy. I don't remember the other one, but they could do it great. They just, hey, it's a great day at Turf Gator. That was the name of the company. It's a great day at Turf Gator. This is Brandy. How can I help you today? They were just great. So the guy called me a couple of weeks later. He said, I just want to tell you something that's going to make your day. He said, I sold a $22,000 commercial lawn care job today. And he said, the lady called me. She was going around getting prices. She was calling companies and called me and talked to me. And we made the deal. And she said, now you want to, she said, the minute your girl answered the phone, I knew who I was going to do business with. He said, really? She said, yes. I knew it was y'all when she answered the phone. So that's how important it is.
Yeah.
I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but being fun to do business with, that's what we're talking about. Dan Kennedy, one of the greatest, probably greatest marketing coach on the planet. I think he's retired now. He used to say, if you can make them laugh, they'll pay you a lot of money. If you can make people laugh. People want to have fun. And during the Great Depression back in the 30s, when everybody lost their jobs, there was no money, banks went under, there were soup lines. And the industry that didn't suffer very much was vaudeville. people would take their last dollar and they would go to a vaudeville show and they'd sit there for 2 hours and just laugh and laugh and laugh. When they came out of there, they felt different. They felt great, at least for a while. But it took them away from their misery and it just let them laugh and forget about things. And I actually wrote a letter one time. It was like a short ad letter, and I put it on my website at my pest control company one time, and it said, the headline said, "Increase your sex life today with quarterly pest control." Now, if you read the article, it wasn't anything obscene at all, but it was like, if you want to be romantic, you can't do it if you got a house full of roaches and rats and bugs crawling around, because your spouse and you both are going to be upset about it all the time. So if you get rid of all the bugs, you'll have time to think about each other. That was the gist of it. So one of my employees came in one day and he said, "I just pulled up at this guy's place to do a new quarterly that we sold." And he said, when I got out of the car, he was working in the yard, and he said, he walked over and said, "I want to ask you something. Did your boss write that letter about increasing your sex life that's on y'all's website?" And he said, "Yes, sir." And the guy said, "The minute I read that, I knew y'all were the company I was going to deal with." He said, "That's great." He said, "Y'all are a lot of fun, aren't you?" He said, "Yes, sir, we are a lot of fun." So, and I think I told you about buying a 16.5-foot, 165-pound live Burmese python and put it under a house
You
in
tell me.
Alpharetta, Georgia, my cousin's house, and it had a crawl space, and I had put polyethylene under it the year before, and I knew it was clean under there. So we found this snake out in Missouri, bought it from a guy for $300. And we were kind of in the snake business. Mark was on the side, you know, he's bought and dealt with reptiles all his life. So we bought this snake, called all the news stations and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and told them that there was this giant snake under a house in Alpharetta, and we were going under there to get it out from under there. And they showed up. And we got the snake. We went under there. We pulled this snake out. It took 3 of us to get it out, and we had it out in the yard, and we're letting them pet it and everything. And the lady from the Journal-Constitution, I got a whole page spread in there, and she said, "How do you suppose?" She was making notes. She said, "How do you suppose the snake got under the house?" I said, I put it under there." She said, "Why would you put something like that under somebody's house?" I said, "Well, have you ever heard stories about people, especially in Florida and stuff, they find a giant snake under it?" She said, "Yeah, I've heard of those." I said, "You ever wondered what you have to go through to get one out from under there?" I said, "We just wanted to show people what you have to do if you ever encounter that situation." She said, "Oh, that's cool, you know." And in the article, she said, she didn't name, she said, "Coleman admits that it was a publicity stunt for his pest control company." So nothing was kept under the rug. I didn't deceive anybody, but people talked about that for years. They said, "I can't believe that snake y'all got out from under that house," or "You're the guy that got that snake out from under the house." So being fun to do business with, you know, get out of the box. I always give people more than what they expect. We talked about this earlier, and I want to give you an example of a firsthand experience I had with the company, Cabela's. Y'all probably all heard of Cabela's. And we had moved into a house that we've been there now about 33 years. When we first moved in, it's an old cedar house, cedar siding. It was about 20 years old, and all the trees in the neighborhood are hardwoods. And bad problem with squirrels chewing on the house. And for years, I'd wanted a really nice modern day air rifle. You know, they're pretty sophisticated, but they're expensive. And I just hadn't wanted to justify spending $300 or $400 for an air rifle. But I finally one day, squirrel was chewing on the house, and I said, I'm gonna get me a nice air rifle. So I'd been looking at them, all different brands, and I chose one. It was a Diana model 46, I think, and it was $450. You could buy it from Cabela's. So I ordered it. I ordered a $150 scope to go on it too, variable scope.
Wow.
So I was like counting the minutes till that thing arrived at my house, and bought it from their catalog. They had them on sale. So I came home and turned in the driveway one day, and there's this tall, narrow box leaning up against the garage. I said, oh, smokes. Jump out of the car, pick that thing up and go in the house. And I just, in my great room, when I walked in there, I just knelt down on the floor and put that box, got my knife, cut it open, picked that air rifle out. I said, oh man, this thing is so heavy. It's so well built. And I'd ordered some pellets, so I got a box of those and opened them up, and it's a side lever cock. You pull it all the way back, you cock it, and then you put the pellet in it, and then I noticed when I tried to close it back, it was harder to close than it was to open it. So I'm pushing on it, and the handle just breaks off in my hand. It broke the hinge. See, I didn't read the instructions, which said cock it, load it, then with your left hand, press the release button to release the handle and close it back up. I didn't know there was a release button, so I just forced it and I broke it. Snapped off. And I mean, I wanted to throw up. I was literally nauseated, and so much anticipation of getting this thing. So I'm still down on my knees there on the floor. There's labels in there, and there's a customer service number. So I just phone called. Lady answered, welcome to Cabela's. It's a great day at Cabela's. How can I help you? Some nice lady answered the phone. I said, yeah, I ordered an air rifle. Told her the model number. I said, it just arrived at my home. I got it out of the box, and I broke the cocking lever on it. And I need to know where to send it to get it repaired. She said, well, sir, just put it back in the box. There should be a return label in the box. She said, put it back in the box, put the return label on the outside, take it to any UPS store and send it back to us, and we'll send you a new rifle. And I said, no, you don't understand. It wasn't broken when I received it. I said, I got it out of the box and I broke it all by myself. And she said, well, no, sir, you don't understand. She said, it doesn't matter how it got broken. It doesn't matter. She said, just put it back in the box, put the return label, send it to us, and we'll send you a new rifle. And I was kind of stunned. I said, you're kidding me. She said, no, sir. She said, I can still hear her saying it. She said, that's just the way we do business. I said, that's so amazing. So I sent it back. They sent me a brand new one. Now that's been 20 years ago. Do you think I still shop at Cabela's? Yes, I still shop at Cabela. Do you think I send people to Cabela's? Yes. I said, oh, you can get that at Cabela's. Go get it at Cabela's.
Yeah.
Why do I do that? Appreciation, law of reciprocity, and what? Obligation. I feel like I owe Cabela's $450. And I feel like I need to pay that back. I can't just take the $450 rifle and let it end right there, because I feel now, I feel like a scumbag, so I got to send people to Cabela's, and that's where I shop.
Mm-hmm.
So,
It's great.
they just are over the top with their customer service. Over the top with
Did they buy Bass Pro? What's the story with
Bass
Pro?
Pro bought
About
them.
them.
Yeah. Johnny Morris. I asked O'Neill about it one time. He said, yeah, he said, Johnny Morris, you got to go to the competition. He buys them. So he owns both of them. So Cabela's and Bass Pro.
We get a kick out of it when we go there. It's the only place where the man is in front and the woman is pushing the cart looking bored as hell.
Yeah. I know.
And he's like hitting a candy store.
Oh gosh, yeah, I could go in there.
Go there and browse.
Go in there to buy, a pack of fish hooks, and I come out of there with a shopping cart.
Yeah,
full of
yeah.
stuff. They're a great place.
They got great candy up front too.
Always respect your customer's time. Never waste a minute of it. If I lose my home, if it were to burn to the ground, I can get another home. If I lose my automobile, I can get another automobile. If I lose my shoes, I can go get another pair of shoes. but I can never get back the 15 seconds it took me to tell you that. That time is gone. And when we're born on this earth with a fixed amount of time. It's like X amount of time. We don't know how much time that is, but it's a certain amount of time. So I'm very particular with my time. I don't want a minute of my time wasted. And so Larry Latimer taught me this. He said, when he was coaching me, when I had my pest control business, teaching me about selling, he said, let me ask you something. Is being on time important in your industry? I said, yeah. Is it a big deal? I said, yeah. He said, do you make it a big deal? I said, we all should show up on time. He said, well, if something's a big deal, you need to make it a big deal. He said, you need to tell somebody. And also, let me tell you how we're different than other companies. We will never waste 1 minute of your time. You will never wonder where we are or when we're going to show up. If we say we'll be here, if I tell you I'm going to be here at 10 o'clock, I'm going to be here at 10 o'clock. If I say I'll call you next Thursday at 20 after 2, I'm going to call you next Thursday at 20 after 2. And I said, with some companies, on time means maybe I got there that day, or maybe I didn't, or we'll be there sometime between 8 and 2. And I said, I realize your schedule can get fouled up, but I've had people that were going to be at my house between 8 and 12, and I wait, and at 5 minutes to 12, they call me and tell me they're running about an hour behind. And my question, when did you know you were running an hour behind? Well, the first stop I had this morning, I had to stay there. So in other words, you've known all morning that you were running behind while I was sitting here waiting for you. And you wait till the last minute to call me and tell me you're running behind. So basically you wasted a half a day of my time. So
Never forget that.
if your day gets blown out, let your customers know immediately that it's blown out. Say, I'm sorry, and I'll give you the option. You can wait for me. I should be there in an hour, or we can reschedule it for another day, whatever works for you. But don't leave them sitting there wondering where you are and when you're going to get there. Make it a big deal about being on time and let the customers know. I was such a fanatic about it. If I said I'm going to be at your house at 1 o'clock, I'd probably get on your street at 5 or 10 minutes till.
Drive around.
Turn around and watch my watch, and I would pull in the driveway and walk up and stand there. And when the second hand's ticking, I ring the doorbell and they open the door, and I'd say, well, I told you I'd be here at 9 o'clock. And they go, oh my gosh, it's 9 o'clock. And they said, I've never had anybody show up like that before. And I said, well, we do. That was their first impression of my company, was that, oh my gosh, they showed up exactly when they said they would show up.
Being there too early is the same thing. People got stuff to do.
Yes, you don't want to get there too early. You catch somebody, inappropriate, and to say the least, or not presentable, and that's really not a good idea. But don't ever waste a minute of your customer's time. Number 5, we're going to do one more, and then we're going to take a short break. Call them by name often. Now, it's generally been accepted in our industry and home service industries that you call people Mr. or Mrs. And I used to do that too, but till I found out that being on the first name basis with somebody is entirely different than being on a Mr. or Mrs. basis with them. If it's Mr. and Mrs., it's all business and there's a wall there. And I've had people tell me, no, I never call anybody with the first name. That's not professional. I said, no, it's not professional, it's personal. You get on the first name basis with them. If you're on the first basis and it's hello, John, not hello, Mr. Smith, because when the chips are down, or if you mess up, or they lose their job and they're looking at cutting back, it's a lot easier to fire Mr. Smith than it is to fire John.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to fire somebody you're on a first name basis with. So call them by name. They say the most beautiful name and the most beautiful word in the English language is your name. People love to hear their name. If you're walking across a parking lot and busy parking lot and you heard somebody yell out, and you're going to be smiling, turn around, who called out my name? Somebody called my name. So we love to hear our name. So call them by name, call them by name often. I had a guy that, an elderly guy that I went to do a termite estimate for one time. And I said, I'm Hal, and he introduced himself to me. And during the course of walking around that house for about, I don't know, 30 minutes I was there, he called me Hal about 5 or 6 times. He said, now come on around here, Hal. I want to show you this. And then, Hal, let me ask you another question about this. And Hal, would you like a bottle of water? You know, and then Hal, it's been a pleasure meeting you. And I went back to my office and I told Kathy, my office man, I said, I went to a stranger's house and the weirdest thing happened. I said, he called me by my name about a half a dozen times. And I said, it was really weird, but it really made me feel good. Made me feel like I'd been knowing this guy all my life and he was a stranger. But I said, it had a weird effect on me. And so it does. So call them by name often. And it's a good idea sometimes to ask somebody if it, you know, if you say, are you Mr. Suter? I'm Hal. Is it okay if I call you Dan? And you're almost always going to say, sure, yeah, call me Dan. And I said, well, I'd rather you call me Hal too. Now we're on a first name basis. We've already made miles of progress just by getting on the first name basis. And I had an employee that was about 21 years old who went to do pest control for my old high school English teacher, who was about 75 years old at the time. And I forgot to tell him, don't call her Ada, whatever you do, call her Ms. McConnell. And he said, he came back, he said, I did Miss McConnell's house. He said, it didn't get off to a good start. He said, I got out of the truck and she was working in the yard. And I said, you must be Ada. She stood up and said, young man, she said, you're not near old enough to call me Ada. No, I said, I could have told you that. She's a school teacher. She's touchy about that. But I said, even I call her Miss McConnell, and I've known her since 8th grade, and I call her Miss McConnell. But so why don't we take a break? And
What do we got? 4 o'clock on the nose?
yeah,
How long you need? 10 minutes?
no, 5
5 minutes? Okay, let's tell them, take a 5-minute break.
Let's take a 5-minute break, folks, and we'll be back and continue.
Very good. I have to tell you about this Hammond services that we have here locally.
What do they do?
They do HVAC in here,
They do what?
air conditioning,
Oh, okay.
that kind of thing.
I think I've heard of Hammond.
Yeah, you probably have.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Welcome back. I think we're just about ready to get started.
All right. Rolling.
Okay.
You want some more coffee, huh?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
I've got some coffee
All
here.
right.
Are we rolling now?
We're rolling.
All right. Okay. Number 6. Okay, way to make your customers fall in love with you is to love their animals. Know the animals by name and give the animals treats. This is a big deal, especially with dogs. Dogs may be a little unfriendly to you in the beginning, but they'll warm up to you really quick if you give them food. And so I recommend that if you have your field technicians, or if you are a field technician, to take a little Ziploc bag with just some little dog treats. They don't have to be big, you know, it can just be dry dog food with a little pellet in there. But always ask permission before you give an animal a treat. But say, is it okay if I give Tuffy, does Tuffy like dog treats? Oh, yes, he does. He would love one of those. So you give him a dog treat or two, and then he's going to follow you around. And now, after about 2 times of that, he's going to know when it's time for you to be there. He's going to see your truck pull in the driveway, and he's going to be ready for a dog treat. And pet him and talk to him. I don't care if you like dogs or not. Pretend like you do, okay? You're on stage here. But you probably won't work with a cat because they'll go under the bed when you walk in the door, and they won't come out for 3 days after you leave. So you don't have to worry about it too much with cats. But if the chips get down and times are hard, and the husband might say, you know, I think we're going to have to discontinue the pest control service. We can't afford it. They come say, no, we can't do that. Tuffy would be heartbroken if Hal didn't come by. We can't do that. He loves Hal. He waits for Hal in the window. We can't let Hal go, you see. So the pet will become a big ally of yours and will help you overcome a problem if you are late, or if you spray something and kill a fish or whatever, whatever you do. But you can be forgiven for a lot of things if Tuffy loves you, okay? So love their animals and they will love you. We all know that some people treat their animals better than they do their own kids. And so take advantage of that. You love their animals and they will love you. Continually let your customers know how much you appreciate them. And I don't mean just say thank you, I appreciate your business. The old standard, it's great day at North Fulton Exterminating, Lord, I can help you. So thank you for your business. But I teach my clients to go way above and beyond that. If you have a customer on the phone who's talking to you about an appointment or whatever, or you're at their home, before you leave, you just say, before I leave, I want to tell you something. Lisa, I want to tell you how much I appreciate your business. I mean it. The fact that you pay me your hard-earned money to take care of your bugs means a lot to me. And I don't take it lightly. And I just want you to know I'm committed to do everything I can at all times to make life good for you, see, help that you don't see any bugs in your home. And I had one of my clients, my coaching clients, say, you want me to say all that? I said, yes, I want you to stop them in their tracks. So one client told me, he said, I said that to everybody last week. I had one lady just stand there and look at me with her mouth hanging open, and she said, I don't know what to say. Nobody's ever said anything like that to me before. He said, well, I just want you to know. And so one of my clients, I said, I want you to go and I want you to say this to your wife tonight. I want you to say, honey, I just want to tell you something. I just want you to know how much I appreciate you and all you do for me. I know I don't say it a lot, but it means a lot to me. And I just want you to know that. He said, you want me to say that to my wife? And I said, yes, I do. And I'm going to ask you next week when we meet, did you say it? So that's your homework assignment. So the next week when we met, I said, did you say that to your wife? And he said, I did. And I said, what was her reaction? He said, she busted out crying. I said, see there? He said, I know, it made me feel weird. I said, but you see how much, you see what it meant to her to hear that you appreciate. So let your customers know, send them a handwritten note. Dan Kennedy always says, I seldom write handwritten thank you notes, but I make it a point to do business with people who do.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're always too busy to do things like that. But send a handwritten note, mention them. If you do a newsletter, mention them, tell them in person. Or just pick up the phone and call one of your best customers and say, I don't have anything to tell you today, but I just really I was thinking about you and I want to pick up the phone and call you and just tell you how much I appreciate your business. And we're here if you need us. We don't take it lightly. And just want you to know that. I said, it'll just blow them away. It'll just make their day. It will do what? It will make them love you. Yes. Number 8, give your customers surprises from time to time, things that they didn't anticipate or didn't expect. My wife, Lynn, when she was teaching school, we would go shopping with her sometimes and say, well, can we stop at the store and look around? And I'd follow her through stores a lot of times, just she likes to shop, and I'd go with her, and she would buy, or she'd come home with a present and say, look what I bought for Mary. That was one of her good friends that teaches with. Look what I bought for Mary, this little thing, you put it on the desk and you put candles in it or something. I said, was it Mary's birthday? She said, no. I said, well, it's not Christmas. I said, why'd you buy Mary a present? She said, I just wanted to buy it because I knew she'd like it. She said, it's just a happy day. She called it a happy day present. She said, it's just a happy day present. But she used to do that all the time. So you give your customers what you might call a happy day present. Just a lot of times you don't really have to buy something. I'll give you a couple of examples. I had every now and then I would have somebody call me up, and it happens every several years. Maybe somebody call me and say, Hal, you want 2 Braves tickets? I got 2 Braves tickets for this weekend. I can't use them. Something's come up. I got 2 Braves tickets. You want them? I said, no, I don't care for them. Thank you for. Well, I don't want them to go to waste. I'm trying to find somebody. I said, no, I don't want, but thank you. I started thinking, why do I do that? So then I would say, no, I can't go, but I know somebody that would like to have them. Really? Okay. So get the tickets and then call one of your best customers. Say, hey, I know you like baseball. How'd you like to go to the Braves game this weekend? Really? Yeah, I got 2 tickets I'd like to give you. Why? Because you're just a good customer. I just appreciate you. I wanted to do something nice, so I thought you'd give us some Braves tickets. Blow them away. So you recycle stuff. You get stuff all the time that you really don't want, especially around Christmas time, especially if you have a business and from vendors and you get stuff you don't want, but don't turn it down. Just recycle it. Turn around and give it to somebody else. And you'd be surprised at the reaction. Now, if it use your own discretion and don't be tacky. I mean, if you're trying to get a pest control and you're meeting with an executive, a big commercial building, and you're meeting in his plush office on the 20th floor, don't give him a recycled Christmas candle or something. That probably wouldn't be an appropriate, impressive thing. But I had a guy tell me one time he would you can take a picture of your dog or whatever and have it put on a coffee mug. So he said he wanted to get this commercial account with this guy. He knew who this guy was, who owned this big building. And he would see him at the Little League games because this guy's grandson played Little League baseball. So he said one day he was there and he just waited around for this guy to leave and was over there talking to his grandson with his uniform. And he said, I went over and introduced myself and say, hi, you don't know me, but I know you. And I thought, would you mind if I take a picture of you and your grandson? And, and the guy said, no. And so he took a picture of him and his grandson. He said, I'll send you the picture. He said, oh, great. That was it in the conversation. So he calls and so he takes that and has it put on a coffee mug of that guy with him and his grandson, and he mails it to the guy. And then he calls up and gets an appointment with the guy to talk to him. This was a real estate deal, to talk to him about his building. Because he had heard, back up a little, he had heard through the grapevine that this 20-story building was going to be going up for sale. So he mails it to the guy, and he said, then I got an appointment to meet with the guy. And he said, when I walked into his office, that coffee mug was sitting on his desk. He said, I knew I had the deal. And he introduced, and he said, that sent you that coffee mug. He said, oh my God, that's my favorite. And he said, where do we sign? The guy just signed up, and he said, I got the deal, and I listed the property, and I sold the building, all because of that coffee mug. Just giving them a surprise. So we'll find ways to surprise your customers. Do things for them. Give them a break when the chips are down. Somebody may have lost their job, or there's a death in the family. Maybe their home has flooded, or there's been a fire, or they're going through a divorce, or, et cetera. When you find out your customers that the chips are down for your customer and you go over there to do the service, when you're leaving, you just say, hey, I tell you what, I know you lost your dad last month. I feel real bad about it, and I wanted to do something for you. So today the service is on me, okay? Today's service is a gift. They're like, oh my God, you don't need to do that. No, I know, but I do. I feel the need to do something, and I just want to give you this service today. It's a gift from me. Now, what's happened? You go back to the law of reciprocity. Something comes up in the future, they get mad, a little bit mad or something, that they can't let you go. You gave them that service, and it's a powerful way to do business and to create longevity. They're going to love you if you give them a break when the chips are down. And this number 9 is one that has gotten a lot of people in trouble. Never assume an adversarial position concerning family, religion, politics, sports, or sex. Those are topics that you should stay away from with your clients, and because you can just get in trouble really quickly and say the wrong thing. And I always give you this example. This was in 1996. I went on an antelope hunt with a friend of mine out to Casper, Wyoming. We met some friends of his in Denver, and there's 3 other guys, and we all hunted for 2 days together. So the first day we hunted until dark. We had 2 or 3 antelope we'd gotten, and we're driving back to Casper from this place where we'd hunted, which was about 70 miles away. But I found out that out in that part of Wyoming, 70 miles is about a 20-minute drive because there's no vehicle traffic, and the people that drive 110 miles an hour, so it's not that long. So we're on the way, we're driving back to Casper at night, and somebody, and now keep in mind, this was 1996, was the year of the OJ trial. And we were all inundated 24 hours a day with the television portrayal of this trial. And we still have pictures of that white Bronco driving down the road going 6 miles an hour with 20 police and state patrol cars behind it with the lights going. You can see, y'all seen it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And they're moving down the road. It's all on the news. So we were telling jokes in the truck there, and I don't remember what was said about O.J. Simpson. But I said, "Oh, did y'all hear they're making a movie about O.J. Simpson?" And the guy said, "No, really? I hadn't heard that." Yeah, I said, "John Elway." Now, keep in mind, we're in Denver. I said, "John Elway is going to star, and he's going to play the part of the slow white Bronco." There was just dead silence in the truck. And I'm like, something went wrong here. I'm sitting in the back, and the guy in the front seat turns around, all the way around, look at me, and he said, "You don't come out here in this part of the country and make jokes about John Elway, fella." Call me fella. He said, you need to remember that." I said, I meant no disrespect. I said, "I love John Elway. I think he's the greatest," which I care less, but I said, "I think he's the greatest quarterback that ever lived. I'm a big fan." I said, it was just a joke, and I certainly meant no offense by it. So for the next hour, there wasn't a word said in the pickup, in the truck we were all in. And now I'm thinking, if I had been out there courting them for a big deal, you see, I just totally blew it by making a political joke, or not a political, a sports hero joke, and I tell this story sometimes. If I haven't offended anybody yet, I'll go ahead and do that now. But I had a client one time that doing monthly pest control, and he and this lady got a little too friendly, and it turned into an amorous relationship. And one day he's over there doing he's over there. I'm not saying doing pest control, and she hears the door open. And it was her husband had come home from out of town 2 days early. She said, "Well, you got to hide. My husband is home." And so she pushed him in the closet and closed the door. So her husband comes in and, took his coat off and walks over and opened the closet door. And there stands my pest control technician standing there with his B&G sprayer in his hand. And the guy said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm your pest control technician, sir." He said, "You got clothes moths in this closet." And he said, "Well, why are you naked?" And he said, "They're a lot worse than I thought they were." So you got to be careful about, you don't know where it's going to go, So in review, I want to say that you got to be, if you want your customers to love you, you've got to be easy to do business with. And you need to be fun to do business with. you need to always give more than what they expected or what they think they paid for it. Napoleon Hill calls it the extra mile formula. Always respect their time. Don't ever waste 1 minute of their time. Call them by name. First name is best, and call them by name often. Love their animals. If you love their animals, they will love you. Show them appreciation. Every contact you have with them, tell them how much you appreciate them. And give them surprises. Give them things they don't expect. Give them a break when the chips are down. And never argue about family, religion, politics, sports, or sex. And we've got a little bit of time left, don't we, Dan?
15 minutes.
How much?
15, 20
Okay, I
minutes,
want to tell you about some businesses I've fired, okay? I fire businesses all the time, especially restaurants. If I go somewhere to eat and they don't tell me how much they appreciate my business and they're not attentive and they just kind of ignore me, I don't ever go back there. It doesn't matter how good the food is. And I'll give you an example. If you're talking about the restaurant down here, says the other restaurant, because there are a lot of restaurants. But a few years ago, up in the same shopping center where our IHOP is that I spoke about earlier, there's a marquee out on the road, and there's a little seafood restaurant opened in there. And it said, Thursdays, all you can eat crab legs. Now, if there's one thing, if there's something I like better than crab legs, I don't know what it is. I've never found it. I could eat a truckload of them. I just love crab legs. So Lynn said, have you seen that sign up there Thursday nights? Crab legs all can eat. I said, I saw it the other day. She said, I know you want to go up there. Why don't we go up there tonight? It's Thursday. I said, okay, let's go. So we went up there. We walk in and there's nobody in the restaurant. And we kind of eat early too. You know, somebody told me when I was young, said my parents used to eat dinner at 5 o'clock and go to bed at 9 o'clock. And I thought they were weird, but later on I figured out they were onto something. So we eat early, go to bed early. I get up early. But we went up there, we walk in, and the only other people in the restaurant was back in the back, very back table. There was about 6 people back there, and the waitress was back there talking to them. And we walk in, there's a little sign that said, wait to be seated. So we're standing there, and it had an open bar area where you look there and you see the guys back there cooking. And it's like what I call an open kitchen. You know, you can see them cooking, you can see what they're doing. The guy's cooking, he saw us walk in, nobody pays attention to us. Told Lynn, I said, well, let's just pick a place to sit down. And so we sat down in a booth, and this girl's back there at this table. They're laughing. She's telling them stuff, and they're laughing. Finally, she yelled out, said, I'll be with y'all in a minute. Lynn looks at me like, oh, she's on thin ice. I said, yep. So finally, she comes up there and says, yeah, okay, can I help y'all? Didn't say, I'm sorry, I've been back there telling jokes while y'all were sitting. She didn't apologize, nothing. She comes up, says, you know, what can I get y'all to drink? I said, well, right now I feel like a quart of vodka, you know. So I said, well, okay. She said, what would you have? I said, I want the all-you-can-eat crab legs. So she brings us the crab legs. They were the best crab legs I'd ever had. They were big, huge, cooked perfectly where they were firm and they just slide right out of the shell. I mean, you know, you can tell they got to be cooked just right. These were perfect. So I ate the crab legs and I wanted some more. So now this guy with a clipboard had walked by our booth twice already. And other than those people in the back, we're the only people in there. He'd walked by, he went in the kitchen, came out, walked by, kind of made quick eye contact with us when he walked by, you know, walked by, came back. And I later found out he was the manager. So now I'm really steamed. The manager comes by, and that's another thing. If I eat at a nice restaurant, somebody other than the waiter better come by my table and check to make sure everything's all right. You know, so manager walks by, never acknowledges us. And then the lady comes, I have to flag her down. I like some more crab legs. How many? Another cluster. Okay. She talks to them for a few more minutes, and she goes in the back. And then we sit there and wait for a full 20 minutes before she brings the crab legs. She brings them out. I ate them. They were great. We give her she brings us a check, pays. We get up and walk out. Not a word was said. We get in the car, close the door. Lynn looks over, says, "We're never coming here again, are we?" I said, "Nope." And I said, I hate it too, because I said, those are the best crab legs I have ever had in my life. But I said, we're not coming back here. Rental car company. I went to rent a car one time, and I actually went to turn in a car that I had rented. And the guy at the desk is talking to somebody. They have questions about renting a car. And he's talking to them. And they talk and they talk and they talk. So I'm sitting there with the keys in my hand, and finally I just said, "Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt, but I need to turn this vehicle in." And the guy looks at me and says, "I'm talking to a customer here. Could you just wait?" And I said, "Actually, he's not a customer. I am a customer." I said, "I've just rented a car from you for 2 weeks, and I've got the key to turn in. He hasn't rented a car from you. He's just talking about renting a car. I am your customer right now, but as soon as I give you these keys, I won't ever be your customer again." And then I asked to see the manager, and the manager came out, and I told him the story. I said, "I won't ever rent a car from you again. Just wanted you to know. Come on here." And we got time for one more?
No, of course.
Had a guy that I love to tell this story. There's a hardware store where I live, and the guy had a reputation for being rude. Just if you walked into the hardware store, he acted like it really pissed him off that you came in there. I mean, you walk in, he said, "What you need today, bud? What you need?" And then he'd get up and go find it, and just in a huff all the time. So I went in there one day, I was going fishing, and I realized I hadn't bought a fishing license yet. So I knew they sold them there. So I went in, he said, "What you need, bud?" I said, "I need a fishing license." He said, "What else you need?" I said, "I just need a fishing license." He said, "People like you just tick me off." He said, "You come in here and you want to buy a fishing license." He said, "I have to sell these according to the state because I sell this stuff. I don't want to sell it." He said, "I don't make any money doing it. And he said, "It takes me 10 minutes to fill all this stuff out. And it's a pain in the butt. And that's all you want?" I said, That's all I want." So he had fishing tackle over there, rods and reels, so live bait and everything else. So for several years after that, every year, I bought all my fishing supplies at Walmart. And I bought everything except one thing at Walmart. That was my license. And I would go in there, "What you need, bud?" "I need a fishing license." "That's all you need?" It's like he didn't remember me from the last year, but because he was such a jerk, reciprocity. I decided to.
Oh, yeah.
He didn't appreciate me at all, so I just paid him back by making him fill out the paperwork. So it was a funny story, but I suggest that you be brutal about firing people, because we buy stuff from people. We deserve to be treated like royalty if we pay our good money. So if we choose somebody to give money to instead of their competitors, and they don't make you feel appreciation and make you feel good about it and go out of there with a smile on your face, then take your money somewhere else. Punish them by firing them. We live in a self-service world, self-service gasoline, self-service salad bar, self-service do-it-yourself. I went to get my driver's license a while back and renewed. I got to go in there now and do it all myself. Yeah. And I'm big on customer service. So If they don't make you feel like you made a good choice, then let them go. So I guess that about wraps it up.
Yeah, see if we got any questions or if we got any questions online. Richie, we got anything? People got any questions?
We got,
Comments? Questions?
and so far we just got folks who are chiming in about the talk and definitely wanting to get a hold of this so they can watch it again sometime. I don't see anything just yet about questions. Oh, here we go. First one. Are you seeing this one from Macedonia?
No. Is it Macy? Yeah.
While
Can
you're,
you read it?
I sure can.
while you're doing, before you read that, I thought that I had a slide on here. I'd like to give everybody a free book.
It's right there.
It's the next slide.
It's next.
No, that's a different one. That's a different one. So listen carefully because I don't have the slide. My latest book is called Bottom Line, How to Grow a Pest Control Business. It's got over 100 marketing and sales tips and strategies. And a lot of people have told me that they've used that book to double their business in like 24 months. So if you will go to howtogrowapestcontrolbusiness.com, howtogrowapestcontrolbusiness.com, you can download that book free. I'd like to give it to you. Or you can go to Amazon and you can buy it for $30, which I'd rather you do. But today I would just like to give you a free copy of the book.
Did you say how to go or how to
How
grow?
to,
How to, okay.
how to grow a pest
I was
control
gonna say
business.
how to grow would be good too.
.com, yeah. I thought I had put that slide in
Is
here.
it not in there?
But apparently,
Go
no,
forward a couple slides.
no, I did
It's not
already.
there? No,
No,
that's it, yeah.
no. So you said we have a question?
Yeah, do you have a question there, Richie?
We got a little bit here. Macy's,
Comment?
let's see. A lot of thanks and appreciation, right? We got Matthew, Alan, everybody saying, one, that they enjoy your presentation, and two, that they really like your message. And let's see, Macy appreciates sharing your knowledge, but they also ask, did anyone put you in their will yet, Hal?
Not that I know of, but that's a good idea.
Right?
You as your customer, we appreciate your business. And have we told you about our new benefactor program that we have? That's a great idea. Yes.
Let's see, more appreciation. Love the sales and customer keeping tips.
If anybody, if I can throw this out, if anybody would like to know more about my coaching program and how I can help you double, triple, or quadruple your business faster than you ever imagined you could, you can call me at 770-993-0004, or you can email me, hal@halcoleman.com. You can just go on the internet and Google Hal Coleman, and you can find all my contact information there. Just remember my name, Hal Coleman. And if you want to send me an email or a phone call, I'll be glad to spend an hour with you. We'll set it up. I'll spend an hour with you at no charge. A free coaching session just to show you what I do and how I can help you. And there's no obligation.
Aren't many people been doing it 50 years, Hal?
No.
Yeah, I'm in my 52nd year. I know at the winter conference this year, they said, everybody stand up.
Oh, I was watching.
And Jim Chase and I were up
Yeah,
front,
the only
and they
two.
looked around at each other like, you're still here. But he's been in it 1 year longer than I.
All right.
53 years, yeah. Yeah, but it's a great industry, and I intend to be around a while longer. Good Lord willing.
Well, if that's it, I want to thank everybody.
Hal, we certainly got a little bit more time. Do you want to talk to us a little bit more about some like people's experience with your coaching? Got anything you want to share
Go to
with
your
us?
next
Yeah, go
slide,
to your
Hal.
next slide. So you can talk about your free, what your marketing videos are
This slide?
about. Yeah, tell them what your marketing
Well,
videos are.
that's on my main website, pestcontrolmarketer.com. You can go there and you can find out about my coaching program. You can you can probably read testimonials from around 50 of my past clients and current clients, hear what they have to say about my coaching program. And they all have their phone numbers on there, and they all have said, you know, you're welcome to put my phone number and have anybody call me. So look at all the testimonials, call anybody you want to call and talk to them about my program. And about 98% of my clients are in the pest control industry. And so would love to hear from you, or if you just have a question you want to ask me. I always answer my phone. I mean, myself, I don't have any subordinate coaches or anything. If you work with me, you work with me. And it's a lot of fun, and it's really rewarding to see people now who are millionaires, and they tell me, I remember when I was a one-man operation and just a few years ago, and you helped me so much. And that's what keeps me going. I love what I do. Love it. Been there, done that.
How long have you been doing this now, the consulting gig?
I'm in my 18th year.
That's insane.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing. 18 years I've been doing it. And so there are a lot of consultants out there and coaches in the pest control industry that, you know, but if you want to know how to go from a 1 or 2 man operator to $1 million business, I can tell you, because I went from a 1 or 2 man operator to $1 million business doing what I tell you to do, and I'll tell you exactly how to do it. So
when you first started doing this, I've talked to operators since they now answer their phone. This is 15 years ago.
Yeah.
They bring dog treats for the dogs, and they picked up on a lot of those tips, and they still use them.
yeah. And this is, you know, this customer service thing is just one aspect. I mean, there's so much to know about marketing. Successful marketing is not any one big thing. It's 1,000 little things.
Yeah.
And if each one of those 1,000 things only gets you one new customer, if you do all 1,000 of those little things, you'll have 1,000 new customers. Yeah. So it's not any one big thing. There's no magic bullet. There's no crystal ball. It takes work. It's just, if you're a 1 or 2 or 3, 4, 5 man operator and you've been that way for years, it's because you're doing things that keep you where you are. Mm-hmm. And if you want to change and get into a growth mode and see your business blossom and grow, get more customers and make more money and grow your business, you got to do things differently. And I'll show you what those things are. But I don't show you things that I'm guessing at. These are things that tried and true. I've worked in, I guess, in the past 18 years, I counted it up one day. It's a little over 150 pest control companies I've worked with. Mm. And, you know, it's, so I'm just telling you the things to do that work for all of these that we've developed in the past that work for all these companies, and they'll work for you too.
Do you have a website person or somebody that helps with websites?
Yes, yeah, Mike Stewart, he helps me. And you can go to, I wish I had this slide. Go to pestcontrolmarketing.live. That's my live internet TV podcast with Mike Stewart and I both. We've been doing that podcast for a few years now. There are probably 200 episodes on there that you can see. It's all free. And we have a group coaching program that's Pest Control Marketing Gold. .com. You can join our group coaching program, but then you get access to years of stuff we've developed. I mean, the amount is mind-boggling what you get if you join our group. And so there are all kinds of ways we can help you. Starting out, the best free way is get my book, How to Grow a Pest Control Business.com, and watch the podcast, pestcontrolmarketing.live. Or if you just want to listen to it, you can go pestcontrolmarketingpodcast.com. But a lot of ways to find us and a lot of ways that we can help you, and we enjoy it. And next year, I would like to suggest that for the 21st year that maybe we have crab legs or something, you know, when we come to this thing and have a spread, have a big
crab
celebration, invite people in and do a low country boil. And we got to get back live again. So Lisa will
That'd be too
prepare
much fun.
wild game feast for everybody.
Lisa used to bring chicken legs or Remember that?
Oh,
Chicken
you
legs
talk
or
about turkey,
turkey,
salad,
yeah.
and
Chili.
and venison,
chili.
venison meatballs
Yeah.
and stuff. I remember a lot of
Yeah,
that stuff.
that's good stuff.
Now
Sounds
what I
like a
get,
winner, guys.
oh,
Get your
and a bottle
ticket.
of water. That's what I get now.
Crackers, don't forget the crackers.
Well, thank
All
you so
right.
much, Hal.
Anything
Hey,
else, Richie?
yeah, absolutely. We got the time. I'd like you to go ahead and talk about something I'm going to put up for you, Dan. Give me just a second here. I think we still got time to chat about this.
Yeah, the survey. Forgotten about that. Do I need to stop share?
No, it's okay. We can see this. Can you see the slide? Yeah, you can
No.
stop your share if it's in the way of you seeing it, but
Oh, yeah.
they're seeing your NAT slide.
Okay, very good. Yeah, let me just comment briefly on this, changing subjects here a little bit, but there's a University of Georgia, myself and Brian Forshall are associated with a group called the North American Termite Survey. And if you scan that QR code right there, you can participate as kind of a citizen scientist by sending alate samples to us, and we will get those identified. And there are other ways that you can get involved in this. You see the states that are included there. It's Alabama, Arkansas, California, Florida, and the list goes on. If you took the 4-hour webinar back on January 24th, all those hours have been submitted, by the way. That was put on by this group. And the primary goal is to get a kind of an updated map of Formosan termite distribution in the southeastern US. So my equivalent and Brian's equivalent at other states throughout the southeast are working with the operators in their states so that come Formosan termite swarm time, which is late May, early June, we're asking people to send in their alate samples so that we can get a better idea of where Formosan termites are distributed. The last time when we did this a couple of years ago, we added 10 counties to the Georgia distribution. So back 20 years ago, 25 years ago, we knew of Formosan termites in 7 counties, and we now know of pretty well established populations in 17 counties in Georgia. And there's probably in that QR code, there's a map of the distribution of Formosan termites in Georgia and in South Carolina, North Carolina, and elsewhere. So if you want to get involved in that, it's kind of a citizen science project. We would appreciate that. It's called the North American Termite Survey, NATS. And that's all I want to say about that, Richie. I just remind everybody to get their sign-in sheet in the next few days. Send it to gtbop@uga.edu, and we will
That's right,
see you.
Dan. I got Beth right here with me, and
Okay.
the folks, come on.
Yeah, we're ready to
sending
tackle it. I
sheet.
can't remember who's up next, but I think for the rest of this year, our webinars rotate between 2 hours HPC and 2 hours WDO. So these first 3, maybe through next month, it might be. At any rate, I think most of the year, about 2/3 of the year in Georgia, we rotate between months, 2 hours HPC and 2 hours WDO. I think today was one HPC and 1 WDO. But appreciate everybody's attendance, and we will see you next month. Thanks, Hal.
All right, folks.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Always good stuff. Yep.
Always enjoy it.
All right, we'll see you all next month. Have a great evening. Yeah, we had 205 people.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.